Hey, so before we begin, quick heads up, my thumbnail artist and the guy who does all my background images recently updated them, and look how awesome they look! I'm gonna leave a link down to his website so you can check it out in the description, which I always do, but just go check out his stuff, he's so talented. With that said, let's get on with the video. Yeah, this is getting a little out of control. That's a little different. Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and all else, to another episode of 3 Random Creepypastas, the show where I go on the Creepypasta wiki and find 3 random creepypastas to read. Episode 9, that's pretty fine. Let's just do this. Let's go. Yeah, this is really different. Alright, we have found our very first story, and it is known as Emotions, and it seems to have been written, or at the very least added to the wiki, by a user known as Reiki, which is a funny username to say the least. Seems like they're a big fan of the rake. Well, emotions are things that most of us experience in life, so let's see what this story can do with them. Fair warning, the story very briefly mentions topics like suicide, so if that is something you do not want to hear about, feel free to skip this story or click off the video. All good? Good. The story also goes over stuff like bullying, so if that are topics that are, difficult for you to handle, I completely understand. Ever since I was a little girl, I've never been able to understand feelings. No, not like the feeling of objects. Nothing simple like that. I'm talking about human emotion. Anger, sadness, jealousy, anything a normal human can feel. I just simply can't. My parents thought I was autistic, so I was pretty much raised on pills and lived surrounded by nurses and beeping machines. When I turned 6, I was allowed to attend a regular school, since nothing but my doll-like state had been found wrong. I was greeted by the usual smiling faces asking me to play with them, and because I was simply overwhelmed by children, I agreed. They sat playing with their dolls, and I just brushed the hair off the one they gave me. Even at that age, I remember feeling a connection to that doll. Without her painted-on smile and shiny eyes, she was dead inside, like I was. As the years went by, instead of being fascinated by me, the children grew scared. They ran away from me, called me a monster and a freak, but I didn't care. I just couldn't. I sat playing with my porcelain doll I had been given by my mother. My life was a simple routine. Get dressed, go to school, get teased, go home and sleep. Until one day in 9th grade, when that jackass Caitlin Morris came up to me, calling me by the name I was not so familiar with. "Hey, Porcelain! What's with the ugly doll? The thing is just as hideous as you!" This was answered by her usual gang of girls laughing their butts off. Caitlin was Queen Bee at Caledonia, my school. Yeah, with the way Caitlin is spelt, you know it's a mean white girl. If you didn't want to obey her every command, she'd drive you to commit suicide. She already had twice. I ignored her and brushed a speck out of Iris's hair. That was the doll's name. "Aw, is little baby doll too scared to answer? The poor little ugly freak is afraid, aren't you?" I again ignored her and turned to walk away, only to have her grab my arm and pull me back. "Don't ignore me when I speak to you, freak! How many times have I had to tell you that? Well, I've had enough, and it's time to teach you a lesson." She snatched the doll up and threw it to the ground, shattering it to the point of no return. "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." She laughed and walked away, her sheep following close after. I stared at the shattered pieces of my only friend, of my only real family. A sudden rush of thoughts swam through my head, and I felt something. It shocked me at first, then angered me. I was even more surprised to realize that I was feeling something. This emotion slowly overtook me as I watched that self-centered jerk walk away. I slowly got up, a piece of Iris's face in my hand. I started off slow, then began running to catch up with her. As I looked at her surprised face, a sick, twisted version of happiness filled me, and I jammed that sharp piece of porcelain into her throat. She clawed at her throat as she slowly drowned in her own blood, with her sheep screaming for help, for their already lost shepherd. I just crouched down at her side and whispered into her ear. "Never play with fragile things, dear Caitlin. You never know when they might shatter." That's why I'm here, in this hospital right back where I started. It's given me time to think about the world I've seen in these 15 years of mine. When you turn off your emotions, you can see crystal clear, see the world for what it is. A world of liars, cheaters, and unfair rules. The weak are picked on and the strong thrive. People like me, are seen as freaks, while everyday people themselves are the freaks. Girls tanning their skin to a sickly orange and starving themselves just to try to fit in and be normal, but who the hell decided what was normal? Okay. I mean, this is obviously the character speaking, not the author, but I don't know how I feel about that. Why are we the freaks, when nobody nowadays seems sane? The tortured souls who are picked on by the truly insane to only make themselves better. It's almost better here. I can escape the ones outside and be free to my own thoughts. It was so nice to be a doll. I didn't have to worry about it. But like any porcelain, I shattered, and I was left to my own hands to glue myself back together. But how can a broken body fix itself? The doctors here expect me to save myself so I can be healthy again, but my fingers have been crushed. Only a skilled hand can put me back together, can put any one of us back together. I wonder if anyone can. I want to be whole, but I want to be free to listen to my own mind and not influenced by the thoughts of others. You can never have both, can you? Those who break are in pain but free. Those who are whole are bound, but can be happy and be loved. We never can. Alright, so that was Emotions. Fairly brief story, not a lot, but it was well written in what it was attempting to convey, I would say. A little bit predictable, I will have to say. A little bit played out, I guess you could say, when you compare to other creepypastas that are, similar, about someone having a bad day and finally snapping on their bullies or whatever and killing them or exacting revenge or whatever. I mean, it's been done before, but I will cut this story some slack because it was made in 2013, so quite a while back, before creepypastas were really hitting their heyday, so to speak. I mean, for what it is, I would say it's okay. I didn't really appreciate, the sort of weird, aside where the main character just went, oh, all these girls who are, like, normal and acting like this, I'm, the unique one. I'm the one that's better than everyone else. I'm not gonna... Or maybe that isn't a negative. Maybe that is there to showcase that the author... right here I misspoke. I obviously meant the main character, not the author who wrote the story. Is, far gone, or is there to show that the author is a very judgmental person themselves. So maybe the story isn't bad in that sense, or like poor in that sense. Like I said, maybe it's there to showcase that the author themselves, views themselves as above every other person in that sense. So maybe it was meant to be challenging. I mean, overall, for what the story is, I would say it was okay. It wasn't anything mind-blowing, and I felt like it could have chewed on a bit more. I felt like it went by rather quickly, which, for me personally, meant that I didn't really get an impression of the story. Not to say that it was bad or anything. It was written fairly well, but like I said, it was a little bit predictable in my eyes. Fairly average, in my opinion, so I would probably give this story a 5 out of 10. If I would have read it back in 2013, I probably would have liked it a lot more than I do now in 2020, so for now I'm gonna leave it at a 5 out of 10. Which, hey, is still a good score. It's basically like a 3 out of 5. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say about Emotions. Fairly alright story. Let's find our second story. Alright, our second story is known as Bedtime for My Daughter, and it was written by an author known as Jonathan Nash. We're dealing with another short one, but hopefully it's gonna be good. Let's take a look. Third place winner for the Wikia Paranormal Short Story Contest. Ooh, some acclaim. My daughter finds it hard to fall asleep at bedtime. More often than not, she is up until 10. I suppose that wouldn't be so bad, but she is only 4 and she should be sleeping much more. But it never really bothered me. I stay up rather late as well, and with her near me, I have someone else to talk to. Sometimes, we have some wild discussions about aliens, horses of all kinds, some with wings, some with horns, the kinds of horses all little girls dream about. But tonight, we were talking about monsters. This struck me as a little odd because she never wanted to talk about anything scary, and the kinds of monsters she was talking about were rather frightening to me. For whatever reason, she thought up this monster with jagged teeth to rip into flesh. It had scales like a fish, slimy and tough, like the armor of an armadillo. But that wasn't the scariest part. That honor was given to what it will do to its prey. This monster will stalk you for a while, perhaps even get you to trust it, then attack. When I asked my daughter how that happens, she couldn't think of an answer. Maybe it was because she was still young and couldn't think of how to manipulate people that well yet. But regardless, I was happy she couldn't think of one. She had fallen asleep at 10:15, which was lucky for me because she started to freak me out with all that monster talk. I picked her up and carried her off to bed. My eyes widened when I was about to lay her down. She was already in bed. I looked down at the child I was carrying. Its eyes were open and black. Alright, very short, but that was Bedtime for my daughter, and for the length, yeah, pretty goddamn good. Yo, I'm going down in the comments. Jonathan Nash is super polite to people. Good stuff. Yeah, I will say I liked that a lot. I felt that was pretty goddamn well written for how short it was. It dealt with some really interesting ideas, of this father talking to their daughter about a lot of different things. Suddenly, the conversations start taking a more serious turn out of nowhere, which weirds the main character out. Then it turns out that the child that they're talking to is not even their daughter, but some weird monster with like dark eyes or something. Kind of scary to think about, and the story ends at the perfect time in my opinion, where you're left wondering what the hell happened next. Like I always say, sometimes that can be a good thing, sometimes that can be a bad thing when a story ends abruptly like that. Here, positive. For the length, I definitely enjoyed the story for what it was. It got pretty spooky with the way the main character was describing, the way the daughter was talking about the monster, describing it and stuff like that. And then you wonder, once the story ends, what kind of a creature would be able to think of these things, and what will it do to the father and the daughter and blah, 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 stuff like that. Interesting to think about. So overall, short story, but pretty goddamn good. So I would stretch myself to give that a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed Bedtime for my daughter, and I thought it was a good story. And that's basically that. So let's move on to our third and final story. Alright, our third and final story is known as A Man in Black, and it was added to the Creepypasta wiki by a user known as Refreshing Demise, also in 2013. I hope I don't get hit by copyright because of this title. And again, the following story deals with a lot of very serious topics, a lot of violence, and mentions of suicide. So again, if that bothers you, please feel free to skip the story. A man walked up to me the other day and asked a question. "What are you doing here?" I was just sitting there on the empty bench waiting for the bus. I looked up to see the man, the blazing hot sun shining down on me. He was dressed in a black tuxedo and wore a dark fedora atop his obviously bald head. A faint smile ran across his deathly pale face. I just stared back at him blankly. Before I could answer his question, he continued with, "Excuse me, you should be at a hospital. It would seem you're bleeding." I returned my sight back to the ground and cocked my head first to the right and next to the left. "Are you sure? You look rather pale." I just kept my head low and kept my face away from his vision. "Well, if you don't want to go, then the least I can do is help." He extended a leather-gloved hand towards me. I simply smacked his hand out of the way. I didn't hear a gasp of surprise or any flinching movement, but instead just heard him retracting his arm slowly. The silk fabric that created the clothes he wore made a subtle euphony. The empty sidewalks around me howled as a small gust of wind blew by and the stilted dust littering the utterly quiet streets fluttering into the air. After that moment, the man questioned once more. "Why are you here?" My hands gripped into my leggings tightly, the red liquid staining them. I don't know," I finally responded. I looked back up at the man as the sun blinded me, his muffled smile still keeping his devious appearance intact. "You don't know? Well then, why do you stay?" I let my vision go back to the golden yellow ground once more as I replied woefully with, "I don't know." The man's dim smile was unwavering. He released a long, stressful sigh and took a seat on the other side of the empty bench. I took my sight away from his and let the undying silence sink in. The utter muteness seemed to last forever when he finally began to end the conversation with, "Are you sure that you are 100% unsure?" I nodded my head up and down slightly. "And you know that there are people watching, correct? It's not just you and I. This place isn't the reality you know," he told me. I nodded my head once more. "Then I will stay and see this through to the end." The speaking cut there. I shut my eyes and took one more moment to let everything that just happened sink in. I remembered that moment. It was only minutes ago. I walked into the house and watched as they began to kiss and embrace. The door was only slightly open as I stalked their every movement. There was a gun leaning against the wall in the corner of the room, a hunting rifle. I checked once more to make sure I had the necessary amount of ammunition in my cold steel revolver. I opened up the chamber, which made a small click that made them both stop in their tracks. I froze in place, staying as quiet as possible. Once they began to get back to what they were doing, I looked at the 3 bullets that were inserted in the gun. It was the perfect amount. 1 for the man that stole her, 1 for the woman that left me, and 1 for myself. I shut the chamber tight and smashed open the door, lifting my gun into the dust-filled air with trembling hands. A cold sweat ran down my face as the man shoved the woman out of the way and ran for the rifle in the corner. I tried to shoot, but I found myself unable to do it. I froze, faced, and wondering what the hell I was doing. As the man picked the rifle and aimed it at me, my adrenaline kicked into gear and my fingers ran for the revolver's trigger. I pulled my finger down hard and heard a deafening bang ring through my ears, and felt a surge of unbearable pain run through me. I saw the man fall to the ground with a thud, and watched the woman run to his aid. As she tended his wounds, I stared down at my own where I had been shot. Blood began to drench my entire body. I covered my wound with one hand as tears started rolling down my cheeks. I pointed the barrel of the gun at the woman's head and pulled the trigger once more. The bang was less surprising that time, but I found myself bawling at what I had done. I couldn't wait there though, so I headed away from the house. As I walked out into the empty streets, crying without relent, people stared at my blood-drenched torso. I ignored all of them and pressed on. Children, mothers, fathers, and all types of family members stared at me intently. Next thing I remembered, I was sitting at an unrealistically empty bus stop, looking at the gorgeous bright orange that shelled the streets as the sun set. I opened my sleepless eyes and stared up into the cloudless sky. The emotionless effect on my face didn't detract from the fear in my eyes as I lifted the gun and shoved the barrel into my mouth. I shut my eyes and was about to pull the trigger when I heard rattling voices about. I opened my eyes to find myself in the middle of a crowd of people, all begging me not to do it, telling me not to pull the trigger and to think about what I loved in life. One last lame attempt by the man in black. The rough, cold steel of the barrel sent shivers down my spine as I looked around the crowd. Near the back of the crowd, I caught a glimpse of a man wearing nothing but black sauntering away. I let the question he asked me run through my head once more, to next block out my surroundings and let the numbness of death consume me. And that was A Man in Black. Really, well, how do I put it? Really heavy of a story to get through. I did enjoy that. It went into some really dark territory, but I feel it pretty much did it as tastefully as you could, based on the subject matter. I thought the writing was really good, really interesting, and the way the story started and the way it wrapped everything up, once everything was revealed and what everything may or may not mean. Yeah, I found it to be a very enjoyable story, but like I said, very heavy and very difficult to go through. Overall, it was a good story, but like I mentioned, very heavy. Overall, I would give that story an 8 out of 10. It was good, but like I mentioned, a very difficult story to get through. But yeah, that was probably the strongest story that we got for this video at least. And that's basically all I have to say about that story and every story that we've read. Alright, those were 3 random creepypastas. I certainly hope you enjoyed hearing me read them. I'd say we had a mostly good batch of stories this time around. So yeah, good stuff. With that said, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and comment your thoughts down below, and let me know which story was your favorite. Don't forget to subscribe. Check out my social medias if you want to, or my Patreon page. With that said, Thanks again for watching. Stay awesome, everyone. Goodbye.